Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into the absolutely incredible story of Japan's transformation. We're talking about a journey from centuries of total isolation to becoming the global powerhouse we know today.
It's kind of hard to wrap your head around it, but the Japan we see today, so open, so influential, was once one of the most sealed-off nations on the entire planet. So what on earth happened? What flipped that switch from stay away to total global engagement?
Well, to figure that out, we've got to go way back. Back to a time when Japan wasn't run by businessmen and politicians, but by powerful warriors with some very sharp swords. Okay, so for a long time, Japan had an emperor. But here's the thing. Over the centuries, the emperor's actual power kind of faded away. The real authority, that shifted to a brand new and pretty formidable warrior class. And these guys would end up shaping Japan for almost 1,000 years.
This set up a really interesting power dynamic. You still had the emperor, right? He was this divine, symbolic figurehead living in Kyoto. But the person really calling the shots was the shogun. Think of him as the great general, the military dictator who was the one truly in charge. So, if the shogun is the top dog, the commander-in-chief, then you've got the daimyo. These guys were like powerful regional governors or generals under him. They controlled huge chunks of land and had their own armies. And yeah, they were loyal to the shogun, but they were also constantly fighting each other for more land and power. This led to centuries of civil war. And holding this whole system together? The samurai. These were the professional warriors loyal to a daimyo. They were the muscle, the enforcers. They did everything from making sure people paid their taxes to defending the entire country from a couple of massive Mongol invasions. Pretty important job. Okay, so after centuries of all this fighting, one super powerful clan finally came out on top. And their victory? It changed everything. It brought an end to all the constant warfare and kicked off an era of peace like Japan had never seen before. But it also led to something else, total isolation. It all kicks off in the year 1600. A guy named Tokugawa Ieyasu wins a massive battle and basically unifies Japan by force. For the next 250 years, his family, the Tokugawa clan, is in charge. They set up their capital in a place called Edo. You might know it better as Tokyo. And with all the fighting finally over, Japan's culture and economy just exploded. But, like I said, this peace came with a catch. The Tokugawa rulers were really worried about outside influence, especially from Christian missionaries, messing things up. So to keep control, they put in place a policy called Sakoku, literally the closed country policy. They sealed the borders, no one in, no one out. The only exception was a tiny, super-controlled trading post with the Dutch.
This long, quiet period of isolation wasn't going to last forever. And it didn't end because Japan decided to open up. Oh no, it was shattered, completely shattered, by the arrival of an uninvited guest. A guest with much bigger guns.
Picture this, it's 1853, you're in Edo Bay, and suddenly, on the horizon, you see something you have never, ever seen before. A fleet of huge iron ships belching black smoke into the sky. These were American warships, and the Japanese gave them a fitting name, the Kurofune, the Black Ships.
The man in charge, Commodore Matthew Barry, had a very simple message from the US government. Open your ports for trade, or else. Let's be clear, this wasn't a friendly request. It was an ultimatum, and it was backed up by some very powerful cannons. And honestly, what could Japan do? Their navy was made of wooden sailing ships. They were going up against steam-powered ironclad warships. It was no contest. The shogunate had absolutely no choice but to agree. And just like that, with the stroke of a pen, more than 200 years of isolation came to a sudden and pretty humiliating end.
Well, as you can imagine, this whole event caused a massive crisis in Japan. People were furious and humiliated. They saw the shogun as weak, unable to protect the country. So what happened? A revolution. A group of reformers completely overthrew the government and kicked off a frantic, high-speed race to modernize Japan.
This whole period is known as the Meiji Restoration. They put the young Emperor Meiji back in a position of real power. And then, wow, in just a few decades, Japan completely changed. The whole feudal system, shogun, daimyo, samurai, gone. They built railways, telegraph lines. They created a modern army, just like the ones in Europe. They set up a whole new government and a universal education system. The thinking was simple and smart. If you can't beat them, join them. They had to become like the West so they wouldn't get colonized by the West.
And Japan learned those lessons incredibly fast, maybe a little too well. With its powerful new military, Japan started to act just like the Western powers it was copying. It started building its own empire. And get this, in 1895, it defeated China. Then, just 10 years later, in 1905, it did something that was just unthinkable at the time. It defeated Russia, a major European power. This sent shockwaves around the globe. Japan had officially arrived.
But this newfound power and ambition put Japan on a direct collision course with, well, with the rest of the world. And this would lead to a truly devastating war, a war that would force Japan to change again, in a way that was even more radical than the first time. So Japan's goal was to dominate the Asia-Pacific and secure the resources it needed for its empire. To do that, it allied itself with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. But there was one huge obstacle in its way: the US Pacific Fleet. So on December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, hoping to knock the US out of the fight before it even began. Of course, what it actually did was awaken a sleeping giant. What followed were years of incredibly brutal fighting across the Pacific. The war finally reached a terrifying new climax. The United States, wanting to force a surrender without a bloody invasion of Japan itself, decided to use a secret weapon, something the world had never seen before.
On August 6, 1945, the city of Hiroshima was destroyed by an atomic bomb. Just 3 days later, a second bomb hit Nagasaki. Faced with a weapon that could literally wipe them off the map, Emperor Hirohito did something unprecedented. He spoke to the nation on the radio. It was the first time the public had ever heard his voice. He announced Japan's surrender. World War II was over.
And what came next? Well, it's often called Japan's second miracle. From the absolute rubble of war, with its cities flattened and its empire gone, Japan reinvented itself again. And the result was staggering. By 1968, that's less than a single generation later, it had become the second largest economy in the free world. Just think about that.
So how did they do it? Well, under a new constitution, Japan was basically disarmed. So it took all of that energy, all of that focus that used to go into its military, and poured it into its economy. It became a giant of industry. Think about it: Japanese cars, electronics, that reputation for incredible quality and constant innovation. It all comes from this post-war period. They literally reshaped the global economy.
So when you look at it, Japan's modern story is really a tale of two radical reinventions, both sparked by a major crisis. The first shock, the American black ships forcing it out of feudalism. The second, the atomic bombs forcing it out of imperialism. Each time, an outside shock forced a complete and unbelievably rapid transformation. It's just a brilliant illustration of how history can completely reshape a nation's identity. And it really makes you wonder, right? If forced contact was the catalyst for the first big change, and total defeat was the catalyst for the second, what's next? As Japan faces all new challenges today, what might be the catalyst for its next great transformation?